Vice President Kamala Harris proposing a 28% corporate tax rate to pay for her economic plans. But what would that mean for everyday Americans? Let's bring in our economic panel. Bharat Ramamurthy, President Biden's former deputy director of the National Economic Council, and Doug Holtz-Eakin, former CBO director. We'll get into that in just a second. But I first of all wanted to go to this, a little bit of a memory hole speech from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez last night. Listen to this.
She understands the urgency of rent checks and groceries and prescriptions. Because if you are a working parent trying to afford rent and childcare, Kamala is for you. If you are a senior who had to go back to work because your retirement didn't stretch far enough, Kamala is for you.
So she seemed to ignore in that Kamala Harris has been in the administration for the last 3.5 years. And talking about seniors having to go back to work, a new study by Caring.com found that 1 in 3 seniors are unretired, returning to work after retiring. 52% of them say that they went back to work because they had to deal with inflation. Bharat, that would not seem to be an endorsement of the Kamala Harris economic policy.
Well, I would just say that Social Security, by the way, keeps up with inflation automatically. And we've actually seen in the data that the number of seniors going out of the workforce and retiring is actually higher than normal. And meanwhile, working-age Americans are working at a higher clip than ever.
So what's AOC talking about there?
Well, I think that what she's trying to say is that if you compare the Harris agenda to the Trump agenda, it's very clear who's going to bring down costs more effectively. And I want to focus on the Trump plan to impose a 10% tax on every single thing that's imported into the United States. Coffee, groceries, prescription drugs, as the representative noted there, that's projected to cost the typical American family $1,700 a year. And I know that Doug agrees with me because I got that number from his website.
but she wants to spend another more than $1.7 trillion in new government spending. We saw what the effects were of the American Rescue Plan. In March of 2021, inflation was running at 2.6%. A month after that act was enacted, it jumped to 4.2%.
Yeah, the American Rescue Plan was a major error. People said so in advance, including myself in Senate testimony, Larry Summers, Olivier Blanchard, distinguished economists. It's been clear in the data. Europe, which had supply chain problems, just like everyone, they always say, oh, it's the supply chains. Yeah, Europe's inflation went from 0 to 4. Ours went from 1.4 to 9.1. And it's the excessive stimulus that came out of the American Rescue Plan. And historians are going to look back and say that was just a mistake. The economy's growing at 6%. You don't need it. It's only a little bit below a full capacity, and you put $2 trillion of stimulus in. It was utterly foreseeable. And most of governing is self-restraint. And what worries me is the absence of self-restraint. You don't do everything you can. You do the things you need to do for the people.
Right. Okay, now, to her raising the corporate tax rate, currently at 21%, she wants to put it up to 28%. The Tax Foundation did an analysis of this, Bharat, back when it was Joe Biden's idea, which she has adopted. It found that GDP would go down 0.6%, GNP would go down 0.6%, capital stocks would decrease by 1.1%, the wage rate would go down by 0.5 percentage point, and full-time equivalent jobs would decrease by 128,000. So why put that burden on the American taxpayer?
Well, the reason I'm smiling is because I remember when they were pitching this reduction in the corporate tax rate in the Trump administration, and I remember very well that Trump and his economic team went around saying that because of this cut in the corporate tax rate, the average wage is going to go up by $4,000 per person. And what we've seen in the data ever since then is that the average wages for the bottom 90% of workers went up $0. What went up is executive pay and shareholder payouts. And so now reversing this and going back up to 28%, which, by the way, is only a little bit higher than what the Business Roundtable was calling for back in 2017. That's going to bring in some money into the government, about $1 trillion over 10 years, help us dig out of the hole that Trump created with the $8 trillion in deficits that he added. And by the way, allow us to invest in some things like affordable housing and affordable childcare that actually do help middle-class families.
Right, but she's just going to dig another hole.
Well, this is a mistake. If you go back to 2013, 14, 15, 16, the run-up to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, we were losing the headquarters of about 5 American firms every year. Just pitched political battles about it. We got the rate down to the middle of the pack in the OECD. Haven't lost headquarters since.
A lot of overseas money.
The IP came back, the intellectual property, the investments here. Wage growth was quite strong in the years after the TCJA. There is no reason to go back and create problems by doing this. I admire the fact that they want to pay for some of their proposals. That's long overdue. But the last thing you do is raise rates first. You broaden the base, and where necessary, raise rates. That's the recipe.
Well, we'll see if we hear any more about this in any greater detail. She's been rather shy on the details so far. Bharat and Doug, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.